The story is told, though who can say if it be true, of a clan of medieval warriors awoken in modern-day Manhattan, of the animated series that told their story.
It is an age of darkness. Superstition and the sword rule. It is an age of fear. It is the age of gargoyles.
Welcome to Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast.
Hello and welcome to Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast. I'm Zach Joyner, the owner of the website that powers the program, Spidey-Dude.com, and I am the executive producer of the network that powers the program, the Spidey Dude Radio Network. Before we get started, though, I wanted to thank our patrons at patreon.com/SpideyDude Network, Greg, Jurgen, Vinkman, Scott, Kaylee, and Phoenician. Thank you for your support. And if you want to get this show earlier, check it out there, as well as other fine perks that you'll get whenever you become a Patreon subscriber. There will be some exclusive content that's only for Patreon subscribers coming to you very soon. But before I turn it over to our hosts, I want to encourage you to check out our other fine programs, such as Spidey Dude Experience, ASM Classics, Make Mine Mayday, Bogan Rider Variety Hour, the Salby Sima Era Podcast, Clone Saga Chronicles, and a Spectacular Radio, a Spectacular Spider-Man related show that starred a few familiar names to the program. Please follow the network on Twitter at Spidey Dude Radio and this show at From Eyrie, and feel free to send them feedback at gargoylesvoices@gmail.com. Leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast catcher, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, iHeartRadio Podcasts, Amazon Audible, as well as Google Podcasts. It helps us raise our visibility, and like, share, and subscribe for more at Spidey Dude Network, youtube.com/Spidey Dude Network. Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, as I mentioned the Twitter threads, but also follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Spidey Dude Network, as well as Instagram, if you like Instagram, instagram.com/Spidey Dude Network. With that out of the way, it's absolutely my pleasure to introduce the hosts of our show, Jennifer L. Anderson and Greg Weisman.
Welcome back, Gargoyles fans, to another episode of Voices from the Eyrie, a Gargoyles podcast. I'm your co-host, Greg Weisman, and joining me as usual is my partner in crime, Jennifer L. Anderson.
Hello, everyone.
And rejoining us is the supervising producer and co-creator of the series, Mr. Greg Weisman.
Hi, everyone.
And we are happy to introduce the writer of this episode, Brynne Chandler.
Hi, y'all.
So, Brynne, thank you very much for joining us. And we like to get to know new guests to the show. Tell us about yourself. How did you become a writer?
Well, basically, I moved to L.A. from Texas, where I was a little Texas housewife, and I was living with Michael Reeves when we got a call from Filmation, from Arthur Nadel, saying that they were starting a new show called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and did Michael want to write for it? And he asked Arthur if he would read a spec script from a new writer. Arthur said, if she can, this was Wednesday afternoon, he said, if she can get it to me by Friday, I will read it. I had never written anything in my life, but I took all of Michael's scripts from other shows and came up with an idea, and in 2 16-hour sessions separated by about 2 hours of sleep, I came up with a spec script. And I would run into the other room and say, Michael, what is it? How do you say when a spaceship goes zoom through shot? And this was so long ago, before any of y'all were born, that he'd say that's called Xerox. The spaceship Xeroxes through shot. So I got the script done. We couldn't get my IBM Selectronic to print it out, so we put the whole computer in the car, drove it to Northridge, where Diane Duane lived, and printed it out on hers. Took it to Arthur at Filmation. He took one look at it, dropped it on the floor, and said, yeah, I'll maybe read it over the weekend. Monday morning at about 9 o'clock, he called and said to Michael, tell me the truth, did you write this yourself? and that was the start of my career.
Awesome.
Nice. Complete chaos. The best way a career can start.
Well, it's also the way it ended, so, at least I'm consistent.
Just embrace the chaos.
That goes way back. I believe J. Michael Straczynski got his writing career started with that show, too.
Oh, he did start.
Yeah.
Straczynski also did start. Well, yeah, because Michael and I, it took us months to talk Straczynski into writing animation. Because back then in the 80s, it was raining soup. They would buy scripts from anybody, and they were desperate for writers. So it's like money was growing on trees, and we had been friends with Michael and Catherine, and took a long time to talk him into trying a script, and He-Man, I believe, was the first one he sold to.
All right. And how did he get the Gargoyles gig?
Well, I was still married to Michael Reeves, and pretty much, I did stuff without him, but if he was on a show, I was on a show. Because you can't have a more dependable writer than the one that you're living with. He wasn't done.
Brynne did such a great job in season 1 that we promoted her to story editor for season 2.
That's true. Thank you. But yes, that's how I got promoted to story editor, is that I wrote a bunch of episodes in the first season. Michael and I had just come off of Batman the Animated Series, and he was not done with that show. Even though the show had ended, he wanted to do something else dark like that, something else that stretched things. And so Gargoyles was and me too, so Gargoyles was a perfect fit for us.
That is terrific. And this is something that the both of you can cover. The process of writing a script, being a writer, being a story editor, being a supervising producer.
I think what we usually did, at least this is how I would call it, Brynne, feel free to correct me, is about once a month, give or take, we'd bring everyone in. I'm talking more season 2 here, because season 1 was usually me, Frank, and Michael in a room, just sort of talking out a story, and then Michael would go off and either write it himself or have Brynne do it, or Lydia or Steve Perry or some, one of the freelancers do it. But season 2, we had 52 episodes to do in the same period of time that we had done 13 episodes for season 1. And so I feel like my memory is that once a month or so, we bring all those story editors together with Frank and I in the conference room at Walt Disney TV Animation's offices in the Academy building in North Hollywood. And so that would be me and Frank and Michael and Brynne and Gary Sperling and Carrie Bates. And I feel like Lydia had written so many. She wasn't a story editor, but she had written so many great episodes, both with Brynne and for Brynne, that often Lydia was also included. I don't think any other freelance writer was, but I feel like Lydia was there at least a few times.
At least
and
a
we
few
just
times,
sort of,
yeah.
I had these index cards of like, okay, here are the stories that we need to do, but they'd be like 1 or 2 words. Like maybe they had 3 words. That was like a lot. Like it might say like banana cream pie or or just have the word Japan on it, or Bushido or something like that, or whatever. And I'd say, here are the group, we need to break the next 4 or 5 stories. Here are the choices that we're picking from. And generally speaking, I would say most of the time, there'd be one of those 4 story editors would say, oh, I want that one. And again, it's not like I had a ton of, they were just even calling them springboards is generous, but they were just tiny little starting points, maybe. And then, the group of us would all work together to talk out some basic beats. I'm not talking about outlining it in any way, but just sort of basic, we could do this with it, then this could happen, that kind of thing. Sort of like act 1, act 2, act 3, like beginning, middle, and end stuff, right?
And this character can be featured. This could be a Brooklyn story. This could be a Lexington story, that kind of stuff. That's how I remember it, too.
And then the story editors would go off, and again, some story editors, I would say nearly all story editors at least wrote some of their own episodes. I know Michael did. Carrie wrote all of his. Gary wrote a few of his. And Brynne, I think you wrote some of yours, but I can't remember. Like the one we're talking about today was actually one of the Michaels that you wrote for Michael. But
but mostly
I think once you started story editing, you wrote some. You and Lydia wrote some. Lydia wrote some. I don't remember who else you used.
Yeah, I think contractually I had a minimum that I was supposed to write myself. It was like 3 or 5 or something. I don't remember. But I know that usually my contracts when I story edited, I was also obligated to write a certain number of episodes. So, but that schedule was
brutal. Yeah. So the stories would go off and either work with another writer or just write it themselves. And they'd start by writing. Did we even do premises? I don't remember doing premises, did we? I know we did outline. I feel like the meeting sort of counted as the premise.
I think it might have. I know at Deke we did it. I had to do it the opposite. We went to script from premise, which was a nightmare. But
that's scary.
Yeah, I think it was awful. But I think we did go straight to outline most of the time.
Right.
It feels like we did.
Usually the writers would write a draft of outline, and then I would write a memo, usually. And that sort of organized my thoughts because I was a brand new producer, so I needed to organize my thoughts. I needed to. I couldn't just start. Let's just talk about this because I couldn't get my head around it all. I needed to sort of sit down, organize my thoughts, and I'd hand the memo off. And then I feel like most of the time we were able to sort of, between the outline and the memo, go straight to script. Every once in a while, it was like, this one we're really reworking. We better do a new outline. But sometimes that new outline would just be like bullet points, this boom, boom, kind of thing. And oftentimes I feel like we'd go right. The writer would go right to script. Story editor would edit it, even if that was the same person. And then it would come to me, and I'd do like a final pass, and then we'd record it, etc. Storyboard, etc.
Yep.
I think that's how we did it. But it was 25, 6, 8 years ago. So.
Are you doing math right now? Don't do math.
Don't do math. We know you're not good at it, Greg. Stop.
So let's talk about this episode itself. What made this, to you two, a story worth telling?
Well, for me, I've been a reader since I was 4 years old, when I taught myself to read so that I could read the captions in the Roadrunner cartoons. So literacy to me is enormously important, and of course I wanted to do a literacy episode. So
I
that's
think
my
for
part
me, I think for me the idea that intrigued me is that I didn't want to take it for granted that all the gargoyles could read. they were coming from a medieval time when, frankly, literacy was rare. And so my sense of things was that, well, Goliath reads. We've literally seen Goliath reading. And Lex, our techno nerd, of course, he knows how to read. And it just seemed like Brooklyn was a guy who loved stories. And so if he didn't read in the medieval era, he'd quickly see the importance of it and teach himself or have himself taught in the modern era. We were always a little, maybe even intentionally vague about when exactly Brooklyn learned to read. But it also seemed to us that what it interested me to sort of approach the problem of illiteracy on two levels. Because when we did a little bit of research on it, we saw that the reasons why kids don't want to read, at least tell themselves they don't want to read, and the reasons why adults, particularly older adults, don't want to read have very different motivations. And we wanted to try and get into both. And the thing, of course, now that I know that didn't know back then and wasn't in the research that we immediately found at the time is that the role that learning disabilities play in illiteracy. Now I know that that's a big factor, that people get discouraged, people come to think they're dumb, etc. Of course, they're not. They just have a different way of learning. And they get discouraged, and so they stop reading. But I was not in 1993 or whenever we wrote this episode, 3 or 4, I guess, aware of that aspect of it. So the two aspects that we were aware of were kids thinking that it was useless because I'd rather just watch the movie, and adults, particularly older adults, being ashamed to admit that they couldn't read, and thus they sort of stayed illiterate because in order to learn to read, they'd have to admit that they didn't already know how. And those were real world, worthwhile things for us to address. And then the trick to it was to, which I think Brynne did a wonderful job with, was to write a script that didn't feel like we were preaching, but just made it feel organic and made the sort of wonder of it emerge from the storytelling, as opposed to, hey, we're getting up on a soapbox and we have a hammer. Let me hit you on the head with a hammer for 22 minutes.
You can't get on a soapbox with an audience as old as ours. If we had been writing this for the 3 to 5 year old set, there would have been more preaching, because you can preach to little bitty kids. But we stayed very far away from the soapbox because teenagers will call you on that stuff immediately.
Ain't that the truth? That title is fantastic also. Where did that come from?
That, this is actually, it came from, I had just read Barbara Tuchman's book, A Distant Mirror. Is that what it's called?
I think so.
I wrote it down. Hang on. Gotta go back in the kitchen and look. It's A Distant Mirror. And there was a poem in the back of it that I believe is called Lighthouse in the Sea of Time. And so I wrote the script and everything, and the Disney lawyers came back to me and said, no, you need to get the rights to this poem from Barbara Tuchman, who had passed by then. So I tracked down her husband, who was living on some small island off the East Coast somewhere, and I called up and I got a caretaker who said, Dr. Tuchman is taking his nap, but when he awakes for his martini, you may speak to him then. So I waited until martini time, and I called Dr. Tuchman, and he said, What? I don't talk to little girls. You have a lawyer call me. So I said, okay. And I went to the Disney lawyers, and I gave them his phone number, and That was Friday night, I think. Monday morning, I was called into the offices of the Disney lawyers who said, no, you cannot use this poem. That old man yelled at us. I said,
and as we know, lawyers are traditionally so sensitive. Lawyers are so sensitive. They just can't answer.
I said, you're Disney lawyers and you've never been yelled at. Give me a break. So they said, if you can find a way to rewrite this so that that old man can't yell at us anymore, then you can use it. So I went back and called Lydia. The internet was brand new, and I don't believe anybody at Disney was allowed to have internet at that point. So I had her do some searching, and she found that the original poem that Barbara Tuchman quoted had actually been written in like the 12th century or something. So I just changed a few words and everything was hunky-dory.
Nice.
Awesome.
So that's where the title came from.
Those poor lawyers getting yelled at.
I know, poor babies.
On the next episode of Better Call Saul, he gets yelled at.
I adore that title, by the way. And a few years ago, I was at a convention in Convergence in Minneapolis, and there was a shirt, and on the back of the shirt was the entire quote from the episode.
Wow!
The version that you and Lydia wrote, and it was attributed to Jeffrey Robbins.
Oh.
As if he was like a real person. You know?
That's
kind of
cool.
But to Jeffrey Robbins. And
that's awesome.
I looked at this shirt and I'm like, did you guys do this? Because I was one of the guests of honor at this particular convention. I said, did you guys do this for me? And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, well, this is from my show. They're like, well, you may have used it in the show, but it's Jeffrey Robbins' quote. I'm like,
oh my gosh.
I'm like, guys, Jeffrey Robbins is a fictional character from my show. And they're like, what? And they didn't even know that, but they just thought it was a great quote, so they put it on the back of a T-shirt. So I have.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
Well, one of the best things that ever happened to me that came through this is that I was at a convention. I think you were there too, Greg. I think it was the last one we were ever at together. And a guy in the audience said that his dream, his whole life, had been to be a librarian. And when he applied to librarian school, whatever, you know, I don't know a lot about universities, but when he was going to get his degree, he used that poem to explain why he wanted to be a librarian, and he got in.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's
terrific.
Amazing. It's incredible.
Awesome.
You don't think about that stuff. You're wrapped up in the show and you're doing your work. And for me, I rarely even see any of the episodes that I write, because by the time they air, I have moved on to the next show. So to understand that someone actually watched it and it actually helped them in some way is just mind-blowing.
When your words really like hit someone and really affect their lives, that's got to be a good feeling.
Because I'm sitting in my kitchen making stuff up.
Let's talk about Jeffrey Robbins. He's only in 2 episodes, but he's a very memorable character.
Well, I mean, we should give some credit, really, to Paul Winfield, who just
all of
really
the credit
brought...
to Paul Winfield. Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
he was amazing.
Yeah, truly, the late great Paul Winfield just he got the character and he just brought so much to it. But the words were there. I mean, you know, there's this great line where Jeffrey is looking up an address in the phone book, By the way, there were these things called phone books.
I was just going to say,
you should love those, baby.
sidestep to explain what phone books were.
You could look up addresses and phone numbers. That's why they were called phone books. They were these big, they were white pages and yellow pages. But anyway, that aside, he's just looking up an address in the phone book, and when he comes up with the address and he finds it, Hudson, he can't read, but also just doesn't understand the concept of a phone book, much as our modern audience doesn't probably. Goes, wow, magic book, and then Jeffrey has this line, "Aren't they all?" Which is a great line.
Yeah,
it's a great line to begin with, and then just the way Paul threw it out there, just laid it out there. Hearing it again last night, I'm like, oh my God, that is a moment. That is such a cool moment in the show. Obviously it's a show about literacy, so that's hitting the mark, right? But just the way he read it was just so elegant. I don't know how else to put it.
No, that's a good word. That's a good word.
Yeah. It was. And so, a lot of that, the writing's there without a doubt, but also a lot of it was really what Paul brought to the part. He was just so good. I mean, and Paul Winfield was always good. Always.
Well,
but
he gave me one of the most terrifying moments in my life after they did the first read through. Because they basically did the read through while they were recording. When it was over, Paul Winfield stood up and said, "Who wrote this?" And I was like, "Oh shit!" And I wanted to. I said a bad word. I wanted to run because I didn't know what he was going to say. And if I remember correctly, Greg pushed me a few steps forward, and Paul Winfield looked at me. And Paul Winfield looked at me and he gave me a standing ovation, and the rest of the cast joined in. So from terror to utter geeky embarrassment in 30 seconds.
Oh, what a great moment. That's awesome.
It was such a great moment. Yeah. Well, everyone who came in to do voices for Gargoyles, they were all incredible. I'm sure we're going to talk about that later, but they were all amazing. Just wonderful people.
Definitely a gifted show on the voice actor, on every level, really. Mm-hmm. But amazing voice actors.
Yes, and such fun people. Oh, my God.
This episode also reintroduces Macbeth after a fairly long absence from his first appearance, and it really adds so many layers to him, and that monologue he delivers in front of Broadway about Camelot is just beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, my big regret about the episode is really the previously. This was the episode that sort of taught me to stop on any show I did after Gargoyles to never do previously segments at the beginning of the episode. Or at least to do them very, very differently, because the previously was all about Macbeth because we hadn't seen him in a while. So it's like, we better set up Macbeth so the audience knows. But of course, the problem with that is that in the script that Lydia and Brynne did, you don't realize it's Macbeth until the end of Act 1. And so by doing the whole previously about Macbeth, the audience...
You showed your hand.
Yeah, we really did. And that was totally my fault, 100% my fault. Like, I should have known better. But like I said, I was a new producer, and so it's
There's
the episode's about Macbeth. We should do a previously about Macbeth. And then I didn't focus on the fact, but that's a reveal. And I spoiled the episode. And that has made me crazy for only 27 years or so. But otherwise, I do think it's a great episode for Macbeth. Again, a lot of credit to John Rhys Davies, who's amazing in the role of Macbeth. But also, I think that, it's that great moment at the end of the episode where he does the the anti-villain thing, you know, where it's all building to this battle between Goliath and him and what's going to happen. And he's got Broadway as a hostage, and then he hears what Broadway and Hudson have to say, and all his fury about these scrolls being a diary. He's got that great line. I don't know. I think I jotted it down, but oh yeah, this is a diary. Where are the spells? You know, he thought he was getting power, a spell book. And so initially he's like completely disappointed that it's only a diary, that it's a journal. And then through these two gargoyles, he sort of thinks, no, wait, these are precious. And all these guys want to do, he realizes, is give these journals to the world, you know. And he's like, I don't need to fight you over that. Just take your stuff, take your gargoyles, and go. And that, to me, that's one of the things that made our series as a whole unique, is that our villain motivation wasn't like, I want revenge, or I want, you know, just to punish you guys, or there was a logic, you know, to their motivations that I think it was stronger than a lot of shows that existed back in that.
Much days. More layers than, you know, your Bebop and Rocksteadies of the group. Yeah.
And that allowed him, and I don't feel like it's anticlimactic. He just sort of, because he's learned the lesson too. And it was a lesson that he already kind of knew, because the way he talked about Camelot with Broadway, as you said, Greg, it's this wonderful sort of speech that came from reading. And so when he hears that he sort of infected Broadway with the love of reading, and realizes that, okay, I didn't get my spells, but this is still pretty cool. So just take them and go. It's okay. You know, that's the kind of thing that I think we could get with some of our antagonists. I won't even call them villains, but antagonists like Macbeth, that you just couldn't get out of most TV series back in those days, I don't think.
Yep.
It was fantastic. And I'm thinking, you mentioned Goliath was always a reader, which he was since pretty much the first episode of the series. And he came from a time when literacy wasn't widespread. Who taught him?
I think he probably learned so that he could read the captions on the cartoons he was watching.
There was
Catherine. Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that makes sense. Simona learned from him. So right. So
I really want it to be Catherine.
But that doesn't make sense, because Catherine hated Goliath until the night until he saved her life, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, I have it backwards.
So I thought they started.
Okay, I thought they started out as friends. This is how good my memory is. I thought they started out as friends, and then she felt betrayed or something. I could have made that up.
No, she was terrified of her father. Had Malcolm had unintentionally instilled her with a fear and contempt for gargoyles as a kid. And,
okay, then I'll go with Simona.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. Simona, and Simona learned from the Archmage.
Yeah.
Or at least from being in proximity to the Archmage.
Right. And she would, any knowledge that he had that she could get her hands on, she would have wanted, even before she was evil.
Yeah.
Because she was just so ambitious.
Right.
This is one of those I'm a native New Yorker questions. I love trying to figure out where the locations of all these these homes, these buildings are, and I've always kind of wondered where Robbins' house was. In City of Stone Part 2, it's clearly in uptown Manhattan, but in this episode it seems to be more along the lines of Long Island, because Hudson falls into the Long Island Sound, I believe.
That's a great question.
He falls into the water. I fell into the water. I am very sure we very intentionally left it very vague as to exactly what water he was falling into. A river, the sound, the harbor. We don't know. There's not enough evidence from the episode itself to sort of judge, but I think the idea is that he washes up on. Between the 3 episodes we've seen the 2 episodes and the 1 comic book that we've seen with Robin, it's clear he lives in Manhattan somewhere. And obviously he lives on one of the rivers. But I don't think we ever specified anything more than that. So,
I don't.
Native New Yorker, Greg, you tell us. Make it work. Make it work.
All right, I will. Well, Macbeth's mansion, I would figure as far uptown as you can get, beyond the cloisters, even just below the Bronx.
The mansion suffers from one of these things. So does Macbeth's airplane, VTOL airplanes. I noticed last night. They all come with these guns that are capable of shooting themselves. Like the gun on that airplane, Banquo fires, hits its own wing. It's the plane's own wing. That's not a smart design. and those guns on the turrets at Macbeth's place also have a tendency of blowing up the actual house that they're trying to protect. It was like, let's get turret guns. That sounds like a good plan. And then you see them in action, you go, yeah, that was not a good plan.
Oh, goodness.
One thing I do clearly remember, I don't have a copy of it anymore, but I believe this episode got a write-up in the New York Times shortly after it premiered.
Yes, it did.
I don't remember. I believe you.
We should track that down.
It was a half a page above the fold.
We really should track that down. Nice.
Yes, they didn't. It was condescending, but they didn't hate it.
Ah. That's a very fine line.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the New York Times is good at fine lines.
This is a good point.
But yeah, I was certainly surprised.
Okay, Lydia Duane. Diane
Yes.
Duane, Lydia Morano.
Absolutely.
Right. And then there was, and then her husband, Arthur Morwood Smith, who was a combo of Arthur Byron Cover and Peter Morwood, who were Lydia and Diane's husbands.
Yes, I am so horrible at names that I came very close to naming my youngest child D'Artagnan. So if I can steal names from other people, I will do it always in everything I write.
I can't. I mean, and my son is named Fox, so I steal names too.
Well, all of my kids are named for writers. My first child, Mallory, for Sir Arthur Mallory. Is it Arthur Mallory? Whoever wrote the first King Arthur. Tom, thank you. Everybody's all yelling the name at me. Thank you. My middle kid is Dashiell for Dashiell Hammett, and my youngest is Alexander for Alexander Dumas. So
nice.
I've had the pleasure.
He's almost D'Artagnan.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Mallory at a few of the Gargoyles conventions. She's really cool, and I'm not just saying that because you're here and you're her mom.
No, my daughter.
She's good people. She's real good people.
She is an old soul, and she was the single most difficult human being on the planet for anyone to raise. But we survived. Yeah, she's an incredible human being, but holy moly, what a kid.
We cast her in one of the Gathering radio plays as Puck one year, and we've been friends ever since. She's just quite the character. I absolutely adore her.
Yeah, she's an amazing actress, but when she was like 4, the late David Wise's wife, Patty, because everybody kept telling us we need to get Mallory into acting. And Patty, who was an actress, sat Mallory down and was talking to her about acting. And she was explaining who the different people in the crew are. And she was talking about the director who's in charge. And my 4-year-old daughter said, okay, the director's in charge, but what if I have a better idea? And Patty was like, no, this is not going to work. By the way, if you are friends with my daughter, if you ever need to put her in her place, if you can, you just remind her that Tim Curry smooched her mommy. She
hold it over her head.
Yep, I do all the time. She had a chance to come to a recording session when Tim was there as Dr. Severius, and he always greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. And she decided that day to stay home and play video games with her friends on a LAN line. Is that right? Whatever it was. Yeah. So she decided to stay home and didn't get smooched. And if I need to remind her who's the mom, that's where we go.
No smooches.
Moving back to the episode, this introduces Macbeth's 2 henchmen, Banquo and Fleance. Names never actually said in the episode. Are those real names for them, code names, or just placeholders? What do you think?
That's a Greg question.
My thought was that Macbeth sort of was like, I'm going to call you Banquo and you Fleance. And they were like, and he's like, it's just what I'm going to call you. I don't want to have to remember your name.
Well, he's in the phone book as Linux Macduff.
We
he
had
actually is in the phone book under that name.
Michael and I don't remember, Brynne, if you were there or not, but Michael and I had this whole discussion at a lunch one day. Not like a work discussion, but just like, what does Macbeth think about the play Macbeth? And
no, I wasn't there.
I like to think he was amused by it. Just like, that he knew Shakespeare and thought Shakespeare was a good guy, and Shakespeare wrote this play, and Macbeth was like, that has got nothing to do with reality. But, it's a great play. And so he had a choice. I could either be really insulted by this or just take it in stride. So I think he's like, it made me famous. How many Scottish kings do people remember in 1994? And the answer is, well, unless you're a historian, there's one. And that's me. So I'm going to take it.
It could have taken him decades and years and years and years before he decided to warm up to the idea that it was a good play.
Yeah, maybe. I think the interesting thing is that, you look at the play and you look particularly at Lady Macbeth, and I think that's the piece that probably would have bugged him the most if he's thinking of Gruach. But at the point where he goes, well, clearly this is supposed to be Demona, not Gruach.
Mm-hmm.
Then yeah, I'm okay with it, So it was. I like to think. I think that's the conclusion that Michael and I reached ultimately, was that he's like, okay, I've decided not to be angry about it, so I'm going to embrace it. So yeah, for Banquo and Fleance. The interesting thing about Banquo, just the model. So on the model sheet, when that was designed, I want to say Mike Vosberg designed it, but I may be wrong. It's so long ago. he had Banquo sort of squinting out of one eye on the model sheet, which was not meant to be like a permanent pose. But there are entire sequences where Banquo's got one eye shut. Not through the whole episode, but for entire sequences where he looks like Popeye. He's got one eye shut, and it's because whoever animated that sequence was like, oh, this guy only has one eye. And the other one's shut. And I remember Frank and I getting that back and going, oh, shit. And it was just too much of it to fix, you know. This wasn't one of our, I mean, I love this episode, and we've certainly had worse animated episodes, but obviously this one isn't one of our better looking ones. Particularly the early sequences on the water are really painful. And Elisa's with that baseball hat is so cute in theory, but not actually on the screen. I would have liked to see a good drawing of her with that hat. And there just isn't any.
None.
There's just none. But I do think that that was one of the things where it was just like, you know, most of the animators who worked on the episode with Banquo, they got it. You know, his eyes, he has two eyes and whatever. But there was clearly one guy who worked on this one sequence where he literally got that one eye shut, like Popeye, through the entire sequence from beginning to end. It never opened. And so that taught us a lesson about shipping model sheets, you know, because that's taught me a lesson even about expression. Like if I get a model sheet on Young Justice or something where, you know, you talk about RBF or resting any face, you know, resting anything face where it's too pronounced in one direction where the expression isn't neutral enough, always looks angry or has a big grin, you know, on it or something like that. And you're like, you understand that we're going to get this shot after shot after shot because this becomes the base. So we've got to make this expression more neutral. And we definitely don't want to have things like a squint in there unless, you know, he really does only have one eye kind of thing. And, but, you know, again, lessons learned from the early days.
One of the moments I really like is when Hudson tells Robbins his name and he explains, like the river. And I just think that was so cute. It's adorable. I love Hudson so much.
I loved writing for Hudson. I think of all the gargoyles, he is the one I understood the best. And, of course, with Ed Asner doing the voice, you could have him do anything. I mean, you could have him do anything. And so, the rest of them were all fabulous as well. I mean, Keith David and, oh my God, Jeff Bennett. But, I just understood Hudson the best, which is kind of weird because I'm Hudson's age now, but I think I was in my 40s back then, so I don't know why I grokked him so well, but he was my favorite to write for always. I mean, my favorite episode, this is a good episode, and I love this episode, and I'm proud of this episode, but the favorite one that I wrote was Long Way to Morning, which is 50% Hudson and 50%.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a good one.
That was a great episode of fantastic.
And it was just pure pleasure to write because, as I said, Ed Asner could do anything.
Speaking of can't do anything, I'm glad Frank Welker finally gets to actually talk as a character here as opposed to doing animal noises, which he is great at, but he's also a fantastic voice actor on top of that.
He is, and he is so funny. Coming into a recording session one day, I had been talking to someone, I don't know who, and I think maybe a couple of girls, and their attitude was, "Oh my God, you know Frank Welker?" And they were swooning. It might have been at Comic-Con. But anyway, I repeated this to Frank, and he turned purple and lost the ability to speak. He is so sweet and so not really understanding. I mean, he has to know how skilled he is, but I don't think he knows how good he is if you understand the distinction.
Yeah.
Unless he can fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you the fun story. First time I met Frank was went to a recording of Atlantis with Greg. And Greg's like, "This is Frank." And I was like, immediately I went to Scooby-Doo, hey, let's talk, I've been a fan for a long time. Let's talk about this. And Greg had no idea that he was Freddy on Scooby-Doo. And I'm like, there's a lot of times when it's very rare when I'm stunned and I don't know what to say. But that I was like, wait, what? Wait. Oh.
He was Megatron too, Greg.
One of the most fun recording sessions. We needed a voice. We just needed, because all the actors would do their main voices, and then if we needed just a background voice or a one-shot voice or whatever, they're allowed to do a certain amount before you have to pay them some more. So we had like one stupid little line that really we probably could have cut, but Frank Welker was going to do that line, and he'd do a voice, and Jeff Bennett would say, "That's Papa Smurf." And then he'd do another voice, and Jeff would say, "Nope, that's..." And they just went through basically his entire repertoire.
Just calling him out on everything.
Nice.
Yep.
And is there anything else left to discuss about this particular episode?
Celebrity hockey.
Yes, celebrity hockey. Even NECA picked up on that one for their buy on the Hudson figure.
I don't know who came up with that. I don't know if that was you, Brynne, or Lydia, or Michael, or who, but it always makes me smile. Just the idea of there's this show on TV called Celebrity Hockey. I adore it. So I've used it since in like multiple. I've used it in comics, but I've used it in multiple TV series. I just love the idea of celebrity hockey.
I'm pretty sure that was me, because reality TV was, we all believed that it was going to kill us. We all believed that celebrity anything was going to kill us. My last thought on this episode is that I want to know how a blind person teaches a sighted person to read.
Well,
sounded out.
I'm just assuming he's teaching him Braille. I don't know. It wasn't until decades later that occurred to me. It's like, wait a minute. I still haven't seen the episode actually, but I, for some reason, needed to go back to the script a few years ago, and I read it, and I was like, wait a minute. How does this work?
Well, if you're challenging me, there are cards that you can get where the letters are raised. In other words, if you wouldn't read a whole book this way because it would just take you way too long.
Right.
But so if Hudson could look at these raised letters so that he got the shapes, and then
Jeff Robinson would know. Robinson would know.
Jeff would feel them and go, okay, that's an L. It makes the L sound, And then Hudson just takes the newspaper and starts trying to sound things out. And Jeffrey, being a pretty smart guy, I'm making this shit up right now as we speak.
I know you are. I know you are.
But Jeffrey goes, from context can tell what the next word's supposed to be. So if Hudson's tripping over a word with like an O-U-G-H in it, like, through or something like that, and trying to pronounce it like throg, Jeffrey can say, oh, that's that. And Hudson would say, this language makes no sense. And Jeffrey would say, yeah, it's difficult, but it's still worth it. Keep going.
That makes sense.
I buy it.
But I
totally
think
buy it.
Hudson had other people helping him as well as Jeffrey.
Yes, that makes sense too.
I definitely think Elisa and Goliath would help him for sure.
Oh yeah.
All right, before we begin to wrap things up, Brynne, it's fair to say you were a veteran of American action drama cartoons and cartoons in general. You said you started back in the early 80s with Masters of the Universe. What was it like watching the type of storytelling in these cartoons evolve, but also helping to push them to evolve? Because Masters of the Universe, to say Ninja Turtles to Batman to Gargoyles, that's quite a progression.
I have always pushed. Watching animation evolve and grow up a little bit was really exciting, but at the same time, in the 80s, when they were animating everything, I mean, we had Gilligan's Planet, we had Rubik's Cube, we had all kinds of stuff that was just, I mean, I wrote Potato Head Kids. But, when you're in the middle of it, you're not thinking about that kind of stuff. I was never allowed really to not be aware that I was the only girl on the boys' playground. So, because when I started, there were only 4 women in all of America writing animation. One was me, one was Diane Duane, and the other 2 were named Diana, but I can't remember either of their last names. So, being in the hot center of it, all you're thinking about is, crap, I've got an outline due on Tuesday, I've got a final script for another episode due on Thursday, and I've got a premise due on Friday. So you're just getting through it. It was wonderful to be able to write things. I mean, I started at Filmation, guys, where we couldn't have anyone stand up or sit down. We couldn't have anybody leave or enter a room. If we could get away with it, we had people talk in 3/4 profile so they didn't have to animate their mouths. And then getting to do stuff at the level of Batman the Animated Series and Gargoyles, where you actually could say Goliath raises an eyebrow and get it animated, was just an incredible privilege. And the level of voice actors we had, I worked with, Frank Parr was both on Batman the Animated Series and Gargoyles, and Frank and I don't know, we're some kind of cartoon soul twins or something, because on Batman, I could put in the script for Frank, 30-second battle involves a chair, Batman wins. And that's all I had to say, because he could read my mind. And so getting to work with him on Gargoyles as well was purest privilege. Just wonderful. So, yeah, I don't know that I did anything to drive the progression, except that if you show me a boundary, I'm going to either kick it or jump over it. But being able to experience that progression was wonderful. It was a blessing.
All right. Before we begin to wrap up, is there anything either of you two would like to plug?
I will plug Young Justice Comics. Young Justice Target, the first issue, is now available both digitally and at comic book stores, full version of it. And issue 2 is available digitally. And next month, issue 3 comes out, and issue 2 will be available in stores. So, and it's a 6-issue miniseries, Young Justice Target. So I hope people will pick that up. And meanwhile, I hope they keep binging Gargoyles on Disney Plus, and we are, working on the 2nd issue of the Gargoyles comic, which Dynamite Comics just announced at Comic-Con.
There actually is something of it, and congratulations on that, Greg, and there actually is something I want to plug. My middle kid, Dashiell Reeves, has recently been hired as a writer of all things comic book related for Screen Rant. So look for his name, Dashiell Reeves.
Nice.
I will.
Yeah.
Well, Brynne, we want to thank you for coming on the show. It was a delight to talk with you and to talk about this fantastic episode.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Brynne. Thank you so much for joining us.
You are so very welcome. This has been so much fun.
And Greg, thank you again. And Jennifer, thank you for everything you do. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, me too. COVID sucks. Wear a mask.
Oh, my fella just had it. It's terrible. It's terrible.
Oh, I was so careful.
He is too.
So
he was careful he lives in Canada, and he was careful there, and he caught it in freaking Dallas at the airport.
Oh, Dallas has cooties anyway.
No offense to our listeners from Dallas. We love you.
All right, everybody. Take care.
Take care and join us next time for... Yeah. Thank you for listening, and join us next time for The Mirror.
The written word is all that stands between memory and oblivion. Without books as our anchors, we are cast adrift, neither teaching nor learning. They are windows on the past, mirrors on the present, and prisms reflecting all possible futures. Books are lighthouses erected in the dark sea of time.